The alien warship Dreadfang hovered at the edge of the Sol system, its massive form blocking out the distant stars. Inside its command center, General Vorth stood tall, his scaled face twisted in amusement. Reports from the Galactic Council had confirmed the unbelievable. Humans had sent only one ship to defend their home. One ship, Vorth growled, his deep voice carrying across the control room. Do they think this is a joke? His officers chuckled, their sharp teeth glinting under the cold lights. The Vrax Empire had crushed countless civilizations, reducing their fleets to ashes. Yet humanity had responded to their invasion with just one vessel, a small, outdated thing barely large enough to be called a warship. It was laughable. Perhaps they are surrendering, one officer suggested, his claws tapping against the control panel. Or maybe they are too primitive to understand war. Vorth smirked. Either way, we will make an example of them. Ready the scout fleet. Let's see what this human ship can do before we wipe them from existence. The command center buzzed with activity as orders were relayed. 10 sleek Vraxian warships broke formation and moved toward the tiny human vessel, which remained motionless in the void. On board the Resolute, Captain Elias Carter watched the enemy ships approach on his display screen. His crew sat in silence, waiting. No one spoke of fear. They had accepted this mission, knowing what it meant. A voice crackled through the ship's comms. This is General Vorth of the Vrax Empire. Surrender your vessel, and we will grant your species a swift death. Resist, and you will suffer. Elias exhaled slowly. He pressed a button, transmitting his response. This is Captain Elias Carter of the Resolute. We will not surrender. A pause. Then laughter erupted from the enemy line. So be it, Vorth sneered. Destroy them. The alien warships accelerated, their energy cannons glowing. The first shot lanced through space, streaking toward the Resolute. The impact should have torn through its hull, but instead, it vanished. Not just the blast. The entire attacking ship blinked out of existence, as if it had never been there. A ripple of silence spread across the battlefield. Vorth's eyes narrowed. His officers stared at the monitors, expecting a malfunction. But the screen showed the same impossible truth. One of their warships was simply gone. Check the readings. Vorth barked. Where is it? No debris. No explosion. No signal. Just nothing. Before anyone could react, another ship vanished. Then another. One by one, the Vraxian warships disappeared without a trace. There was no weapon discharge from the human ship, no sign of an attack. It was as if reality itself had erased them. Panic spread through the alien fleet. Vorth slammed his fist against the console. Pull back, he ordered. Something is wrong. But it was too late. The last of the scout ships flickered and was gone. Now only the Resolute remained, floating in the darkness, silent and untouched. On board the human vessel, Elias leaned back in his chair, watching the screen. His hands remained steady. He had expected this reaction. The enemy thought they were facing an ordinary warship. They were wrong. The Resolute was not designed for traditional combat. It carried no missiles, no laser cannons, no shields. It had something far more dangerous, a weapon that defied the rules of existence itself. Elias turned to his crew. They're afraid now, he said calmly. Let's show them why. Across the void, General Vorth struggled to understand what he had just witnessed. His fleet was one of the strongest in the galaxy, yet 10 ships were simply gone. Not destroyed. Erased. His claws dug into the armrest of his command chair. His mind raced. This was not technology, he understood. This was something else. Something dangerous. He swallowed his anger and tapped into the fleet-wide comms. All ships prepare for a full-scale assault. We outnumber them 1,000 to 1. Whatever trick the humans are using, we will crush it with sheer force. The fleet adjusted its formation. Hundreds of warships shifted, their weapons locking onto the lone human vessel. The sky filled with the glow of charging energy cannons. But on the Resolute, Elias watched them without fear. The enemy thought numbers would save them. They were about to learn the truth. General Vorth's claws tapped against the metal armrest of his command chair. His golden eyes burned with frustration as he stared at the empty void where his scout fleet had been just moments ago. 10 warships, gone without a trace. No explosions, no debris, no distress signals. It was as if they had never existed at all. His officers whispered among themselves, their confidence shaken. The Vrax Empire had conquered countless worlds, crushed entire fleets, and reduced civilizations to ash. But this was something they had never seen before. "This is a trick," Vorth growled, his deep voice silencing the murmurs around him. "The humans are using some kind of cloaking technology to deceive us." One of his lieutenants, a nervous-looking officer named Ralvik, hesitated before speaking. "General, our scanners show nothing. No energy signatures, no teleportation residue. If they had destroyed our ships, there would be wreckage. But there is nothing." Vorth narrowed his eyes. He refused to believe that a single human ship had the power to erase his fleet. The thought was absurd. "Enough," he snapped. "We are the Vrax Empire. We do not fear primitive tricks. Ready the second wave. 50 warships. I want that human vessel obliterated." The order was given. 50 sleek, heavily armed Vraxian warships peeled away from the massive fleet, forming a deadly crescent around the lone human vessel. Their weapons hummed with energy, charging for a coordinated attack. Inside the Resolute, Captain Elias Carter watched the enemy's movements on the holographic display. His crew sat in silence, waiting for his command. There was no panic, no fear. They all knew what this ship was capable of. A voice crackled over the comms. It was Vorth again, his tone filled with cold amusement. "Impressive trick, human. But tricks do not win wars. Surrender now, and I will spare your world from total annihilation." Elias leaned forward, pressing the transmit button. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "I don't think you understand what's happening, General." Vorth sneered. "Enlighten me." Elias exhaled slowly. "You assume your ships were destroyed. That's not quite right." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "They were removed." Vorth's claws tightened around the armrest. "Removed. You keep looking for debris, for wreckage, for something left behind. But you won't find anything, because those ships never existed." A cold wave of unease spread through the Vraxian command center. Some officers glanced at each other, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Vorth bared his teeth in a snarl. "Enough of this nonsense. Fire." 50 warships unleashed their full firepower. Energy beams, plasma torpedoes, and high-velocity projectiles streaked toward the Resolute, set to tear it apart in a devastating explosion. But just like before, nothing happened. The instant the weapons made contact with the ship, they disappeared. Not deflected, not absorbed, just gone. And then, just like before, the attackers themselves began to vanish. One by one, the warships blinked out of existence, their presence erased as if they had never been built. The Vraxian fleet watched in horror as 50 of their most powerful ships ceased to be. On the bridge of the Dreadfang, Vorth's breath came in short, furious bursts. His mind rejected what his eyes were seeing. This was not war. This was impossible. What is this?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Elias's voice came through the comms once more, steady and unshaken. "The Resolute is not a warship, General. It is something far worse. Humanity knew we couldn't win a conventional battle against your empire, so we built something different. Something designed to end wars before they begin." Vorth felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation creeping into his chest. Fear. "The technology on this ship does not destroy," Elias continued. "It erases. It removes things from time, from space, from reality itself. Your ships were never here. They never existed. And soon, General." Elias let the sentence hang in the air. Vorth's scales bristled. His heart pounded in his chest. He opened his mouth to issue another command, but before he could, an officer let out a terrified gasp. "General, the fleet. It's—" Vorth turned to the main display and felt his blood run cold. The Resolute was no longer just targeting small attack groups. Now, entire sections of the Vraxian armada were vanishing. Hundreds of warships, gone in the blink of an eye. It was unstoppable. The greatest fleet in the galaxy, the pride of the Vrax Empire, was being erased from existence, not by a massive human armada, not by advanced superweapons, by one single ship, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. A message spread across the galactic network, one that should have been impossible. Reports whispered of an entire fleet disappearing, not in battle, not through destruction, but through something much worse. The Vrax Empire, once seen as an unstoppable force, had lost dozens of ships without a single trace of debris left behind. The Galactic Council, a coalition of powerful civilizations that had long feared the Vrax, now gathered in emergency session. Holograms of various species flickered into existence around a circular table, their faces filled with confusion, disbelief, and something rare, hope. "How can this be?" demanded the reptilian diplomat of the Thauran Dominion, his voice laced with suspicion. "No race has weapons that can make an entire fleet vanish." "It is no weapon," replied a pale-skinned representative from the Kilari Republic, her eyes narrowed in thought. "Weapons destroy. This is something else. Something far more dangerous." Silence filled the chamber as they turned their attention to the one being who might have the answer, an old gray-haired human who sat quietly among them. His name was Admiral Richard Lorne, one of Earth's highest-ranking officers. Unlike the others, he showed no signs of fear or confusion. He simply watched. The Thauran diplomat leaned forward. "Admiral, we demand to know the truth. What is the Resolute? What have your people created?" Lorne exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping against the table. Then, with the weight of history in his voice, he finally spoke. "You all made a mistake when you judged humanity's strength by the size of our fleet." His voice was calm, almost sorrowful. "We knew we could never outnumber the Vrax. We knew their war machine was too vast, too powerful. No alliance could match them ship for ship. So we didn't try." The Kilari representative's eyes widened. You never intended to fight them with numbers." Lorne shook his head. "No. We knew we wouldn't get a second chance. We had to make our first move our last." The room fell into stunned silence. The truth was starting to dawn on them, but none of them could accept it yet. The Thauran diplomat clenched his jaw. "Then tell us, what is the Resolute?" Lorne leaned forward. "A ship built with the first working quantum disruptor." A murmur spread through the chamber. Some gasped. Others shook their heads in denial. "Impossible," someone whispered. "That kind of technology is a myth." But Lorne simply nodded. "We turned the myth into reality." The Kilari representative's voice was barely above a whisper. "Explain it to us." Lorne's gaze swept across the room. "A quantum disruptor doesn't fire energy beams. It doesn't launch missiles. It doesn't rely on shields or armor. It doesn't destroy its enemies. It removes them." The chamber grew cold as the weight of his words settled in. "Every ship the Resolute targets doesn't explode," Lorne continued. "It ceases to exist. The particles that form its structure are unraveled at the quantum level, erased from reality itself." He paused, his voice grave. "And it's not just the ship that disappears. Everything it ever interacted with is rewritten. It was never constructed, never crewed, never part of any battle. The records of its existence vanish from history. It was never there." For a long time, no one spoke. The full horror of the situation finally hit them. A fleet wasn't just being defeated, it was being undone. The Thauran diplomat's voice trembled with something close to fear. "How far does this effect reach?" Lorne was silent for a moment. Then softly, he said, "We don't know. The realization struck like a thunderclap. Humanity didn't fully understand its own weapon. Lorne continued, "We had no other choice. If we fought the Vrax the way every other species did, we would have lost. So we built the only weapon that guaranteed we wouldn't." The Kilari representative shook her head in disbelief. "Then why send only one ship?" Lorne's expression darkened. "Because one is enough." The words sent chills through the room. Back on the battlefield, General Vorth was starting to understand the terrifying truth. His fleet was still vanishing in waves. No alarms, no warnings. Ships that had been part of his empire's proudest war machine were simply gone, and with each passing moment, more were erased. His communications were failing. His commanders were disappearing. His own memories of them were fading. He struggled to recall the names of the ships he had once commanded, the officers he had once trusted. The Resolute was not fighting a war. It was rewriting reality itself. He grabbed the console, his breath ragged. "This is not possible," he whispered. But the truth was undeniable. The greatest fleet in the galaxy was crumbling, and soon, so would he. The bridge of the Dreadfang was no longer a place of order. It was a place of chaos. General Vorth watched in growing horror as his empire's invincible fleet was being erased before his very eyes. His officers shouted conflicting reports, their voices laced with confusion and fear. "General, the Severance is gone. The Bloodfang, too, vanished from all records. I don't remember what fleet division was stationed on the left flank. I just looked at them a moment ago, and now The officer trailed off, his scales paling. Vorth turned his head sharply. "What did you just say?" The officer looked down at his own shaking hands. I don't remember them. I know there were ships there, but I can't recall their names, their commanders, their formations, as if they never existed." The words sent ice through Vorth's veins. He clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms. He had been fighting wars his entire life. He had faced powerful enemies, unpredictable battlefields, and overwhelming odds. But never before had he felt true terror. The humans had not just built a weapon. They had built a curse upon reality itself. Vorth turned to his remaining officers, forcing his voice to steady. "Listen to me. We cannot fight this. We cannot win. We must retreat." A young officer, desperation in his eyes, barked back, "Retreat to where, General? If this continues, there will be no empire left to return to." Vorth's claws scraped against the command console. He knew the officer was right. The Resolute was erasing them at an exponential rate. It was not an attack. It was a collapse of history itself. But then a new thought struck him, one that filled him with a desperate, reckless kind of hope. What if the erasure wasn't instant? What if there was still time? He spun to his communication officer. "Are we still connected to the High Command?" The officer hesitated before nodding. "Yes, General, but signals are becoming unstable. It's like something is unraveling the very fabric of our networks." Vorth snarled. "Then we do not have much time. Patch me through." The screen flickered before stabilizing. A ghostly image of Supreme Overlord Krellis appeared, his regal form hunched over his throne-like command chair. But even he, one of the most feared leaders in the galaxy, looked shaken. "Vorth," Krellis rasped, "what is happening? We are receiving fragmented reports, fleets vanishing, officers forgetting their own forces. The entire war effort is—" He stopped, his slitted eyes narrowing. "General, where is the rest of your fleet?" Vorth swallowed. "It's gone." Krellis's nostrils flared. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" Vorth forced himself to speak the words aloud. "Not destroyed. Not defeated. Erased. The humans have developed a weapon. No, something worse. It does not kill. It removes. Ships, records, memories, everything it touches ceases to exist. This war is over. If we do not stop them now, the entire empire may disappear." Krellis's expression hardened, but Vorth could see the flicker of fear behind his cold eyes. This is unacceptable. The Empire has stood for over 10,000 cycles. We cannot be undone by a single ship. It does not matter what we find acceptable, Vorth snapped. We are already being unmade. Kralis leaned forward, his fingers curling around the arms of his throne. Do you have a plan? Vorth hesitated. Yes. It was a lie. But it was a lie he needed to believe. He took a deep breath, focusing on the only thing that mattered now, stopping the Resolute before it was too late. Because if they failed, it wouldn't just be the Vrax Empire that vanished. It would be everything. The command deck of the Dreadfang was a tomb of silence. The screams, the desperate orders, the frantic calculations, all of it had stopped. There were only flickering consoles, dim emergency lights, and the distant, echoing hum of a ship that had once commanded entire fleets, but now drifted at the edge of oblivion. General Vorth stood in the center, his massive frame rigid, his golden eyes staring blankly at the screen. He could still hear the whispers of his officers from minutes ago, their voices turning to static before they themselves vanished. Entire battalions, officers he had trusted for decades, soldiers who had sworn loyalty to the Empire, all gone. And worse, he could barely remember them. His mind clawed at empty spaces where memories should have been. Names, faces, battle strategies, they were slipping through his grasp like sand in a storm. He had fought wars across the galaxy. He had conquered civilizations, crushed rebellions, rewritten the fate of worlds. Now, the only thing being rewritten was him. The Resolute still hung in the void, silent and unmoving, its black hull reflecting no light, giving no sign of the devastation it had wrought. It had never fired a single weapon. It had not dodged a single attack. It had simply existed, and in doing so, it had undone everything Vorth had ever known. He exhaled, steadying himself. His hands clenched into fists. No more hesitation. No more fear. He had one last move to make. He turned sharply to the comms officer, the last one still standing. Prepare a direct transmission to the humans, Vorth ordered. The officer hesitated. General, if we hail them, they will. Do it. The officer swallowed hard but obeyed. Moments later, a single voice crackled over the speakers. Calm. Controlled. Human. This is Captain Elias Carter of the Resolute. Vorth's claws scraped against the metal railing of his console. Captain Carter, he growled, his voice low and heavy with the weight of his dying empire. I want to speak to the one in charge. There was a pause. Then, softly, Carter said, I am the one in charge. Vorth's muscles tensed. The fate of an entire species rested in the hands of this single human. He had expected a war council, a ruling class, a desperate negotiation from their leaders. Instead, all he got was one man, and that more than anything terrified him. Vorth exhaled, forcing his voice to remain steady. We do not understand what your ship is doing to us. Carter was silent for a long time before responding. I believe you do. Vorth's jaw tightened. No, human. I do not. Carter's voice was calm. Too calm. We warned your empire not to push humanity into war. You did not listen. We had no other choice. Vorth's grip on the console tightened. You think this is victory. He let out a bitter laugh. Your ship is not a weapon. It is a mistake. If it continues, it will not stop with us. Another silence, and for the first time, Vorth heard hesitation in the human's voice. What do you mean? Vorth's eyes narrowed. He had them. Doubt. Uncertainty. He could feel the human faltering. He leaned forward. You don't know how deep this goes, do you? How far the unraveling spreads. His voice was cold now, sharper. Your ship doesn't just erase. It infects reality itself. Carter was silent. Vorth pressed on. Every time you erase a ship, its crew, its history, you are rewriting the universe. The connections they made, the events they set in motion, they are being unmade. You do not know what will collapse next. Finally, Carter spoke, but this time, his voice was not as steady as before. Go on. Vorth's eyes gleamed. You erase my fleet, my empire, and you think it ends there. No. The Vrax Empire conquered 1,000 worlds, shaped entire civilizations. If we never existed, then neither do the conflicts we started, the alliances we forced, the economies we built. You are unraveling the very timeline you exist in. Silence. A deep, heavy silence that stretched between them like the void itself. Vorth smirked. Tell me, human, what happens when you erase the wrong thing? What happens when your ship removes something that was meant to exist? The transmission cut out. Vorth exhaled sharply, his chest rising and falling in slow, calculated breaths. He knew what that silence meant. Fear, doubt, hesitation. For the first time, the humans were afraid of what they had done. And if there was one thing Vorth had learned in all his years of war, it was this: a hesitant enemy was a weak enemy. The Resolute had the power to erase anything, but now, the humans weren't sure if they should. And that was the opening he needed. The bridge of the Resolute was silent. No alarms, no flashing lights, no battle damage. And yet, for the first time since the mission began, Captain Elias Carter felt something he had never expected to feel: doubt. He sat in his command chair, his fingers tapping against the armrest as General Vorth's final words echoed in his mind. You do not know what will collapse next. The mission had been so clear before. The Vrax Empire had forced humanity into a war it could never win through conventional means. The Resolute had been humanity's one and only answer. A ship not built for battle, but for something far worse: erasure. One by one, the enemy ships had disappeared. No wreckage, no survivors, no history. But now, Carter's hands clenched into fists. The Vrax general had thrown doubt into their minds like a blade between the ribs, and damn it all, it was working. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Murrah Quinn, broke the silence. Sir, what if he's right? Carter didn't answer. Quinn took a deep breath. The Vrax conquered 1,000 worlds. They altered history, forced alliances, started conflicts. She hesitated. If they never existed, those timelines could start unraveling. Carter finally turned to her. Are you suggesting we just stop? Quinn looked uncertain. I don't know. But sir, this isn't like a normal war. We're not just killing an enemy. We're erasing them from existence. What if there's a breaking point? What if we're already past it? Carter exhaled sharply and stood. His voice was steady, but his mind was racing. We didn't come this far to hesitate. The Vrax Empire started this war. We're just making sure we finish it. A voice crackled from the communication station. Captain, we just lost sensor readings on another enemy ship. Carter frowned. That's good news. The officer shook his head. No, sir. We didn't target them. It just happened. Quinn stiffened. Wait, you're saying ships are vanishing on their own? The officer swallowed hard. It's worse than that. The logs show the ship never existed at all. The memory core rewrote itself. For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. Then Quinn turned to Carter, her voice tight. Sir, I need to say it plainly. We may have lost control of the erasure effect. The words sent a chill through Carter's spine. He looked back at the screen, where the Vrax flagship still hung in the void. The Dreadfang was the last of its kind, the last Vrax warship left. They had won, but at what cost? Carter turned back to his crew, his voice quieter now. Give me a full system scan. I want to know exactly what's happening. The scan ran, the bridge filled with tense silence. Then, Captain, the officer's voice was barely a whisper. It's spreading. Carter's breath caught in his throat. Define spreading. The officer's hands shook as they worked the controls. Sir, we're detecting quantum destabilization in sectors we never touched. Entire solar systems are changing. Some are just gone. He hesitated. And we're picking up something else. Something terrifying. Carter stepped forward. What? The officer swallowed hard. Records are changing back on Earth. The blood drained from Carter's face. That was impossible. The Resolute had never fired anywhere near human space. The erasure effect had been contained to the battlefield. It was supposed to be precise, targeted, controlled. But now, the past itself was shifting. Quinn's voice was hoarse. Sir, this isn't just about the Vrax. We may have rewritten our own history. Carter's mind raced. His heart pounded against his ribs. He turned to his crew. Tell me exactly what's happening on Earth. The officer checked the readings, his fingers trembling. Sir, we don't know. The logs are shifting too fast. People, cities, nations. It's as if parts of our past are blinking in and out of existence. Carter gritted his teeth. This was no longer a war. This was a catastrophe. And then, a new alert flashed on the screen. A ship. A human ship. But not the Resolute. The crew froze. They hadn't sent for reinforcements. No one else should be here. And yet, a vessel had just emerged from nowhere. Quinn's breath hitched. Sir, But Carter had already seen it. His mouth went dry. Because the ship's designation was impossible. It was the UES Olympus, a battleship that had been decommissioned over 150 years ago. A ship that should have been scrapped and forgotten. Yet here it was. Real, present, and hailing them. The crew stared at Carter, waiting for a command, waiting for an answer. Carter exhaled. His hands were steady, but deep inside, he knew the truth. They had tampered with the fabric of existence itself. And now, reality was fighting back. The UES Olympus hung in the void like a ghost from another era. It shouldn't exist. It couldn't exist. And yet, there it was, broadcasting an open hail to the Resolute, as if it had simply stepped out of time itself. Captain Elias Carter stood frozen, his crew waiting for orders. His mind raced through the impossible implications. The Olympus had been decommissioned 150 years ago. It was scrapped, dismantled, its systems and technology outdated long before Carter had even been born. And yet, his scanners said otherwise. The ship was real, its systems running, its power levels normal. And that meant only one thing. The timeline was breaking. Quinn's voice was barely above a whisper. Sir, what do we do? Carter forced himself to move, stepping forward. Put them through. The main screen flickered, and a face appeared, one that should have been buried in history. An admiral, dressed in a uniform that hadn't existed in over a century. His face was sharp, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, they knew. Carter swallowed. This is Captain Elias Carter of the Resolute. Identify yourself. The man's voice was calm, steady. I am Admiral Richard Hayes of the UES Olympus. And Captain, we need to talk. Carter exchanged a glance with Quinn. Admiral Hayes has been dead for over 100 years. Hayes nodded. I know. Silence. Carter exhaled. How are you here? The Admiral's expression darkened. Because, Captain, you broke time. The words hit like a hammer. Carter had suspected it, feared it, but hearing it spoken aloud sent a cold wave through his chest. Hayes continued. Your ship, the Resolute, was designed as a weapon to erase an enemy. But the universe doesn't allow for selective erasure. Every action has consequences. You started by removing the Vrax. His voice lowered. But now the past is correcting itself. Carter's fists clenched. Correcting itself. What does that mean? Hayes leaned forward. It means you set off a chain reaction. The moment you erased something fundamental to history, the universe began pulling from the past, from alternate possibilities, to fill in the gaps. The Olympus, my crew, we are not from your time, Carter. We are from a time that never existed until you created it. Quinn's breath hitched. Are you saying? History is rewriting itself. Hayes nodded. Yes. And it's only going to get worse. Carter's mind raced. The enemy was gone. They had won the war. But now reality itself was unraveling. What do we do? Carter asked, his voice harsher than he intended. Hayes' face was grim. There's only one way to stop it. You must undo what you've done. Carter stiffened. You're saying we have to bring back the Vraks? Hayes nodded. Yes. A ripple of shock moved through the bridge. The Vraks had been monsters, conquerors who had burned entire civilizations to ash. Billions had died at their hands. And now, Carter was being told that erasing them had been a mistake. He exhaled, his thoughts spiraling. Even if I believe you, how do we do it? The Resolute was designed to erase, not restore. Hayes' voice was grim. You don't have to. The universe is already trying to correct itself. But it needs help. The process is unstable, too chaotic. You must guide it. Carter glanced at his crew. Their faces were filled with uncertainty, fear. He turned back to Hayes. And if we don't? The Admiral didn't hesitate. Then reality will collapse. Not just your time. Not just mine. All of it. The air in the bridge felt heavy, suffocating. Carter had fought wars. He had faced death 100 times. But this was something else. This was a war against existence itself. A choice lay before him. To undo everything he had fought for. To bring back an enemy that had nearly ended humanity. Or to risk the unknown. To let the timeline collapse and hope whatever came next would still include them. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then he made his decision. Carter turned to his crew. His voice was steady, commanding. Prepare the ship. We're going to fix this. No one argued. No one hesitated. Because now, they were fighting for something far greater than victory. They were fighting for reality itself.